want to report that we're thugs and we're breaking shit down. You got these two big black dudes protecting you from all these black folks. We're the ones that need protection. Report for us. You're working for Fox News. Adam Jackson just went on Sean Hannity. Why are you running away? I'm not doing it.
He's running. He got Geraldo on the run, y'all. Look at this. He got Geraldo on the run.
Talk to me. He just talked to me. Just talk to me.
Hey, Geraldo, we on
the conversation. Yeah, because you're not replying. Because we are angry. But listen, a black man can raise his voice. A black man can raise his voice, and you don't have to be intimidated. Because I want you and Fox News to get out of Baltimore City. Because you're not here reporting about the boarded up homes and the homeless people under MLK. You're not reporting about the poverty levels up and down North Avenue. 2 years ago, when the 300-man march, and we marched from the top of Hilton to from Hilton and North to Milton and North, you weren't here. But you're here for the black riots that happened. Right? You're not here. You're not here for the death of Freddie Gray. You're here for your story. No,
I'm always out at like restaurants and people will come up to me like, I know you from somewhere. And I always have to be like, yeah, I'm the guy from the Geraldo video. It's hard to imagine that moment, this month makes 4 years since that moment happened. And that 20-year-old kid you see in that video is not the activist that you see in front of you today. First off, before that moment, I was never called an activist, even though these are the same topics I talked about in debate rounds and at lunch tables in high schools when all my homeboys would say, yo, will you shut up with that black power stuff? It's the same work I was doing when, in 2012, me and a couple of friends of mine started a nonprofit called Brothers in Action. Like thousands of other people, I had never protested before that moment, even though I ultimately came to realize that my entire existence is a protest against the limitations that are placed on black bodies. More importantly, I had no idea who Geraldo Rivera was, nor did I know that that moment would change my life forever. So while millions of people from across the world sensationalized the pain and suffering I was expressing, I ultimately realized through that moment happening that we as individuals have the power to influence people, and we have to use that power. Now, this viral moment, I've done a lot of cool things, but this viral moment did not come without any consequences. You see, the next day after the video went viral, the National Guard surrounded my house with armed troops and tanks. That same week, I was fired from my job. 2 months later, Baltimore City Police took my car. And a few months after that, I was evicted from my home because I had lost my job. I think the most damaging thing that I lost was a relationship with my parents, who had worked their asses off to make sure that we didn't have to go through that. And I was struggling, and I refused to get a job. And they were like, just stop, and I kept getting arrested. But see, what they didn't realize is something that I ultimately realized was that the death of Freddie Gray gave me a purpose for life. You see, I remember before this moment, I was at work, I was a bellman at the Marriott waterfront, and we were watching the coverage of the protest in the back, and we watched as thousands of young Baltimore City students were trapped at Mondawmin Mall bus terminal. Literally trapped, they cut the bus service off. And a white female coworker of mine said, oh my gosh, did anybody die? And I said, of course somebody died, that's what this is all about. And she said, I'm not talking about the thugs, I'm talking about the police. And it was at that moment that I realized, the same way that I realized in 8th grade when I got called a nigger for the first time while at a private school, is that they see us, but yet they overlook our existence. Baltimore, it's a beautiful place. It's where the bus stops benches read greatest city in America, while national headlines read deadliest city in America. Baltimore is made up of 270 different neighborhoods. And depending upon which neighborhood you're born in, it has the effect of whether or not you have options, opportunity to privilege spaces like this, and even the chance to live. You see, I know this because I grew up, I like to say, like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, except I was Carlton, like Oxford and Cardigan and everything. But my dad played the role of Uncle Phil for a lot of my cousins and a lot of my friends. See, I grew up as the exception. I did not grow up as the norm. Now, I could talk to you today about Fells Point or the $1 million homes in Guilford. I could talk to you about Natty Boh beer, crabs, and chilling at the O's game. But today I want to take you to a place that politicians only visit during election years. I want to take you to the same place that millions of people romanticize about The Wire, the same place where young people in Baltimore City who are affected by gun violence every day, their voices aren't represented in the March for Our Lives. The story of Freddie Gray can be seen as a case study for the problems that plague inner city communities. You have police brutality, you have public housing discrimination, you have lead paint poisoning, you have drug addiction, you have all of these different issues that makes us ask, how come he couldn't have been successful? See, Freddie Gray did not die in the back of a police van. Freddie Gray was dead before he ever interacted with those Baltimore City police officers because Freddie Gray never had the chance to live. Freddie Gray did not live an ordinary life. He did not die an ordinary death. However, both Freddie Gray's life and his death have become a common experience of black people in this country. Take a look at it like this. Freddie Gray, both of his parents were heroin addicts. Freddie Gray's older brother was murdered. Both Freddie and his sister had damaging levels of lead paint poisoning. Sandtown, Winchester, the neighborhood in which Freddie Gray was born and raised in, has a median income of $12,000. There are more people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated from Sandtown, Winchester in jail right now than any other neighborhood. More than a fifth of the homes in that neighborhood are abandoned, and more than a third of able working people are unemployed. Actually, it was just announced that some of the public housing complexes in that neighborhood would be knocked down and that 100 families will have to be relocated to reduce violence. You see, we can't just erase people. We actually have to highlight them and give them a chance. So I've done a lot of work protesting and highlighting issues and talking about the problems. But then at a certain point, once I got a little older than some 20-year-old that just likes to yell at people, I realized that if we just talk about the problems, that's not enough. I decided to become a part of the solution. I decided to be a solution-based thinker and turn protesting into actual, tangible change. So I took a job working for the same institution which I had spent over a year at that point critiquing and protesting against. I took a job with the city of Baltimore. And I've been called everything from a sellout to whatever you call it for taking that job, right? But see, I thought to myself, if people like me aren't inside of these institutions making decisions that ultimately change the way society works and this city spends its money, then we'll just be re-entrenching the cycle. So I've done work with building youth programming for the city of Baltimore for over 2 years now, or going on 2 years. We did a weekend program in East Baltimore where young people would get paid in cash and we would take them to life skills training and just give them a chance to get away from Baltimore. We worked with the squeegee kids, the kids who wash the windows at intersections here in Baltimore City. We did a lot of work with them, giving them entrepreneurial training. And what I realized was most of those kids were homeless. There was one couple in particular who I took interest in. They were 16 and 17, and they were living in and out of a vacant home. And so I was helping them get permanent housing because I didn't want them to get lost in the foster care system. We thought they were mature enough, we can get them jobs, we can get them housing. So after an emotional day in the housing authority's office, where we had to ask the parents, why aren't you taking care of your children? And they said, well, what are you going to do for me? I took those kids to my office because I had a meeting. And the young man looked up at me when we got to my office on the 13th floor, and he said, Mr. Kwame, you really work here? And I said, yo, what are you talking about? Yeah, I really work here. He said, I didn't know we could be in places like this. And I said, what you think, white people only supposed to make money? But Think about what he said. He said, I didn't know that we could be in spaces like this. He didn't know that he could exist from everything that he's ever seen. He didn't have that option to vision it. And so we go to a restaurant afterwards. I take him and his girlfriend to a restaurant, and we're sitting down, and he looks at me again, and he says, Mr. Kwame, do I have to pay to take this food home? And I said, what do you mean, do you have to pay? I already paid for it. He said, yeah, but I'm not finished my food. Do I have to pay to take it home? Because I want to take it, but I don't want to hurt your pockets. And I said, what, you never been to a restaurant before? Like, just joking with him. And this kid looked me dead in my eyes and said, no, I haven't. There are kids that live and were born 10 minutes from where we are today that have never been to a sit-down restaurant. They have never had the chance to experience something we take for granted every day. And that's why I do the work that I do. Because I don't want to just be the token black guy who gets to come into these utopic spaces. I don't want to be the exception. I want to become a part of the norm. And each one of you can help in changing society and changing the narrative of Baltimore. Because it's two different worlds. And even though the two worlds are geographically located in the same place, think about it. There would be no need for a private police force at Johns Hopkins if we actually gave opportunity to young people who live in this city. Because the 63% of black people that make up Baltimore are not represented in the student population here at Hopkins. Now, this viral moment gave me a platform that ultimately I had no other option but to make something out of it. And it goes to show that no matter what you are or where you are in life, you can inspire people to do the same thing. See, I firmly believe that the next great doctor is living right now in Baltimore City, that the next great lawyer is living in Baltimore City, that the next great astrophysicist is living in Baltimore City. See, there are heads of universities that are in Baltimore City, but we just haven't tapped into their potential. And that's why those of us who are privileged enough to be in this space today, we can leave this room so that it's not just another talk of rhetoric, but we can actually make tangible change by just bringing a young person along. If you go and you tap into these young people's potential, we ultimately can lower the poverty rate, we can give them options, we can save lives. This can't just be another talk. We can't just continue to re-entrench the cycle, because politicians, if it's not clear on nationally or locally, they ain't the savior. It's up to us. Devin Allen uses photography to teach young people how to tell their own narratives in a way. Some people dance. You've heard many speakers who have more degrees than I. They do amazing things. But there can be no success without a successor. So we have to pave the way for young people. We have to continue to connect the dots so that Baltimore does not exist on two different levels, but that we can all finally come together and make this place the greatest city in America, because we tapped into the greatest potential. Thank you.